The highway rest area was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of fading sunlight, when a roaring pack of motorcycles shattered the stillness. Heads turned as a group of leather-clad bikers rolled in, their engines growling like thunder. They were loud, brash, and clearly used to owning every space they entered. Among them, a cocky leader with a toothpick in his mouth surveyed the lot with a smirk, his crew laughing at some crude joke. In the corner of the rest area, a lone woman sat on a bench, sipping water and casually scrolling through her phone. Dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans, she looked unassuming, just another traveler taking a break. But what they didn't know was that this woman was no ordinary bystander. She was a highly trained Army Ranger, someone who had seen more action than most could even imagine. The bikers, sizing her up, decided she'd be an easy target for some amusement. Maybe it was the way she didn't acknowledge them, or maybe they just wanted to flex their dominance. Either way, their mistake was about to become very clear. One of the bikers strolled up to her, his voice dripping with mockery as he made a snide remark. The others laughed, egging him on, their jeers growing louder. But the woman didn't flinch. Slowly, she looked up, her calm eyes locking onto his with a gaze so steady it made him pause mid-sentence. What happened next left everyone in shock. The cocky grins faded, the laughter stopped. The power dynamics of the situation shifted in an instant. Stay tuned to find out how this unexpected showdown unfolded, and why you should never judge someone by appearances. This is a story you won't forget. The air seemed to crackle with tension as the biker froze under her unwavering gaze. His swagger faltered, just for a second, but he quickly recovered, masking it with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" he sneered, glancing back at his crew for support. They chuckled, but even they could sense something was off. The woman remained calm, taking another sip of water as though his words hadn't even registered. But anyone paying close attention would have noticed the subtle shift in her posture, a quiet readiness, as though she could spring into action at any moment. One of the older bikers leaned against his motorcycle, watching her with a curious expression. "Hey, Mike," he called out to the leader, "maybe you should leave this one alone. She doesn't look like the type to scare easy." His voice carried a note of warning, but Mike dismissed it with a wave. "Relax, man. She's just playing tough," he said, turning back to the woman. "All right, let's make this simple," Mike continued, his voice dripping with false charm. "You can hand over whatever you've got in that bag, or we can make things interesting." He motioned toward her backpack sitting on the bench. The other bikers murmured in agreement, their confidence returning. But the woman didn't move. She finally set her bottle down and leaned back, her eyes scanning the group with a look of quiet amusement. "You boys really have no idea, do you?" she said, her voice steady and calm. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, no one spoke. A few of the bikers exchanged uncertain glances, but Mike stepped closer, his patience wearing thin. Whatever was about to happen, it was clear this encounter was far from over. The leader, Mike, took another step forward, his confidence clearly fueled by the presence of his crew. "Listen, sweetheart," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You might think you're tough, but out here, numbers talk. You're outmatched." His grin widened, but the woman's expression didn't change. She simply tilted her head, as if she was sizing him up. Behind him, the rest of the group shifted restlessly. Some seemed to feed off Mike's bravado, laughing and throwing out their own taunts. But others, like the older biker, hung back, their eyes flicking nervously between their leader and the woman. There was something about her, something unsettling. She wasn't panicking, wasn't even remotely intimidated. "Are you done yet?" she asked coolly, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The question startled Mike, his cocky grin faltering once again. But he wasn't about to back down in front of his crew. "I don't think you get it," he said, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You don't call the shots here, I do." At that moment, the tension in the air was almost suffocating. The group fell silent, their attention fixed on the unfolding standoff. Even the sound of the nearby highway seemed to fade into the background. Next move, the two men from the SUV stayed where they were, their presence enough to tilt the balance of power entirely. The woman stepped forward, her calm gaze locking onto Mike. "You had your chance to walk away," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "But you chose the hard way." Mike's fists clenched, but he didn't move. The tension was unbearable, the rest of the bikers waiting for someone, anyone, to make the first move. Then, out of nowhere, the woman reached into her back pocket. Every eye was on her hand, the bikers stiffening in anticipation of what she might pull out. But instead of a weapon, she produced a badge, simple, understated, but unmistakable. "Army Ranger," she said, holding it up just long enough for them to see. "Special operations, and I'm not alone." Mike's face went pale as the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just some random traveler. She was trained, experienced, and clearly had backup waiting in the wings. Before he could respond, one of the men from the SUV spoke again. "We're federal agents," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And we've been watching this rest area. You've been on our radar for a while, Mike." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The bikers turned to their leader, shock and betrayal written across their faces. "What's he talking about?" one of them demanded, stepping back. Mike stammered, his bravado crumbling completely. "It's not what you think," he started, but the woman cut him off. "It's exactly what they think," she said, her tone ice-cold. "And now it's over." The agents moved in, handcuffing Mike as the rest of the bikers scattered, their unity shattered. The woman stood back, watching silently, her calm never wavering. But just as the agents led Mike away, she turned and said, "Next time you pick a fight, make sure you know who you're dealing with." And with that, she walked away, leaving behind a scene no one at that rest area would ever forget. As the agents secured Mike in the back of the SUV and radioed for backup, the rest area began to return to its usual calm. A few of the scattered bikers lingered at a distance, still too stunned to process what had just happened. The woman walked back to her bench, picking up her water bottle and backpack as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. One of the agents approached her, nodding respectfully. "Nicely handled," he said. "We've been tracking that crew for months, but you made our job a lot easier." She gave a small shrug, her expression unreadable. "They made it easy," she replied. "They thought they could intimidate anyone. Turns out they were wrong." The agent smiled, then gestured to his partner, who was double-checking the scene. "We'll take it from here," he said. "Thanks for holding your ground." She nodded and slung her backpack over her shoulder. The faint roar of the remaining motorcycles faded into the distance as the last of the bikers fled the area. For a moment, she stood alone, watching the sun dip lower on the horizon. As she turned to leave, the older biker who had warned Mike earlier reappeared. He approached cautiously, his hands outstretched to show he meant no harm. "I didn't want things to go that way," he said quietly. "But I guess it was bound to happen." She studied him for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "You've got your own choices to make," she said. "Just make better ones than he did." The biker nodded, looking thoughtful, before retreating to his bike and driving away. The woman walked back to her car, her steps steady and sure. As she pulled onto the highway, the rest area disappeared in her rearview mirror. Another day, another reminder that the world is full of unexpected challenges, and sometimes the quietest people are the ones who make the loudest impact. The woman stood up slowly, her movements deliberate, and now they could see she wasn't as ordinary as they'd assumed. She wasn't tall, but the way she carried herself made her seem larger than life. Her eyes locked onto Mike's, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Here's the thing," she said, her tone calm but firm. "I don't like bullies, and I don't let people like you dictate how my day's going to go." Her words hit like a challenge, but instead of responding, Mike hesitated. For the first time, the balance of power seemed to shift, and the rest of the bikers were starting to notice. Mike clenched his jaw, his confidence slipping as he realized this wasn't going the way he'd imagined. The woman stood her ground, her calm demeanor only adding to the unease rippling through the group. A few of the bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado now tempered by something they couldn't quite explain. "You've got guts. I'll give you that," Mike said, trying to reclaim his dominance. He stepped closer, towering over her. "But guts won't get you far when you're outnumbered." She didn't flinch, didn't step back. Instead, she let a small smile tug at the corner of her lips. "Outnumbered doesn't always mean outmatched," she said quietly, her voice steady as a rock. The older biker, the one who had seemed cautious from the start, finally broke the silence. "Mike," he said, his tone low and serious, "I think we should let this one go. Something's not right here." Mike shot him a glare, but the tension in his eyes betrayed him. "You're getting soft, old man," he spat, but his voice lacked the usual bite. The woman shifted her stance ever so slightly, and the subtle movement made a few of the bikers step back instinctively. There was something about the way she carried herself, controlled, deliberate, almost predatory. "What's the matter?" she asked, her voice cutting through the thick silence. Not so confident anymore. One of the younger bikers, emboldened by the tension, muttered, "She's bluffing. Nobody takes on a whole crew like this." But as she looked around at each of them, her calm gaze seemed to pierce through their posturing. "Bluffing," she said, almost amused. "You sure about that?" The air was electric now, the suspense unbearable. Mike took a deep breath, his fists clenching at his sides. He was teetering between retreat and escalation, and everyone there could feel it. Whatever was about to happen next would change everything. Mike's breath came heavier now, his bravado cracking under the weight of the moment. He looked at his crew, searching for reassurance, but their expressions were mixed. Uncertainty and fear creeping in where arrogance had once been. The woman, still calm, took a deliberate step forward, and though she wasn't physically imposing, the sheer confidence in her movements sent a ripple through the group. "I'll give you one more chance," she said, her voice low, but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Walk away. No one gets hurt." Mike let out a strained laugh, but it didn't have the weight it needed. "You think we're scared of you?" he said, his voice louder than it had to be, as though trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Before she could respond, the hum of an approaching vehicle broke the tension. A black SUV pulled into the rest area, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. The doors swung open, and two men stepped out. They were dressed casually, but there was something about them, an air of discipline and readiness that mirrored the woman's. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the scene and locking onto her. "Everything all right here?" one of them asked, his tone neutral but carrying an undercurrent of authority. Mike's face hardened, his confidence shaken even further by their arrival. "Who are they?" one of the younger bikers whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman didn't answer right away. She simply turned toward the newcomers, a small nod passing between her and the man who had spoken. It was subtle, but it spoke volumes. These weren't random strangers. The second man stepped closer, his posture relaxed but deliberate. "Ma'am," he said, addressing her respectfully, "do you need us to intervene?" She smiled faintly and shook her head. "Not yet." The bikers shifted uneasily, the weight of the situation hitting them in full force. Now it wasn't just one woman they'd underestimated, it was something much bigger, and they had no idea what they were up against. Mike's bravado was gone now, replaced by a tense silence as the reality of the situation sank in. The bikers, once so loud and confident, were frozen, unsure of their